Congratulations, folks, for making it to the national finals. Appreciate all of your hard work. My name is Jamie Gass. I'm director of the Center for School Reform at Pioneer Institute. It's a Boston-based think tank, and my colleagues will introduce themselves too.
Hi, my name is Tim Isaacs. I'm the executive director at the Center for Teaching the Rule of Law, located at Roanoke College in Salem, Virginia. Congratulations on making it to the finals.
Hello, everyone. My name is Darcy Kern. I am a professor of history at Southern Connecticut State University, and we are looking forward to hearing from you today.
Maybe you could introduce yourselves and your teacher.
Hi, we are Unit 1, and we are all juniors from Wauwatosa West High School, and we are the state champions from Wisconsin. My name is Cooper Krause.
I'm Leah Tormson.
I'm Ronan Piantek.
I'm Trisha Kroll.
And I'm Adele Saliga. And we are here on behalf of our mentors, our teaching assistants, and our teacher, Mr. Chad Matesky.
Great. Well, this is Unit 1, and we'll be addressing Question 1, and I'll read all of Unit 1 question and all of Question 1. So Unit 1, what are the philosophical and historical foundations of the American political system? Question 1, quote, the American War is over, but this is far from being the case with the American Revolution, end quote. To what extent, if any, did revolutionary principles influence constitution making during the founding period? What problems, if any, does the principle of consent present when creating or amending constitutions? To what extent, if any, are revolutionary principles evident in modern times? Timer, you may begin.
The most celebrated victory of the American Revolution was most certainly the creation of the United States. Yet perhaps the more pertinent and by far more revolutionary achievement was, as John Adams stated, the radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affections of the people. Embodied in the Declaration of Independence, these revolutionary principles were visibly incorporated into constitutions throughout the founding era and can still be seen today.
In addition to its well-known establishment of the right to revolt, the Declaration of Independence also recognizes popular sovereignty and the protection of natural rights as American revolutionary principles. These foundational principles were utilized throughout the founding era and in constitution making, explicitly stating that governments are instituted among men. The Declaration of Independence immediately solidified the importance of popular sovereignty, which was later solidified by the words, "We the people."
Popular sovereignty is guaranteed by law on a federal level with Articles 1 and 2 providing for federal elections, as well as through the amendment process, which allowed the people to proactively alter the Constitution. Although the Constitution required ratification by delegates, some state constitutions, such as the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, allowed for direct consent through ratification by the common people.
Likewise, the protection of natural rights was first enumerated in state constitutions, with 9 out of 13 including a Declaration of Rights. Virginia specifically included life, liberty, and property as described by John Locke in his natural rights theory.
The founders held consent of the governed in the highest regard, with Jefferson saying that government derives its just powers only from the consent of the governed. However, they also recognize that it comes with certain challenges. Due to their experience with the Articles of Confederation, the founders understood that unanimous consent was impossible. A simple majority is considered sufficient consent for ordinary legislative acts, but the threshold is raised to 2/3 of both houses and 3/4 of state legislatures for amending the Constitution by Article 5.
Laws determining whose consent is valued have continually expanded, widening the scope of suffrage and allowing for a more representative electorate. The 15th, 19th, 24th, and 26th amendments recognize that it was unconstitutional and, more importantly, unjust to disenfranchise Black Americans, women, the poor, and those old enough to be drafted. But even to this day, not everyone under U.S. jurisdiction has consent that is valued.
Puerto Rico, as well as other U.S. territories, are not able to consent to federal legislation and are only provided a non-voting delegate to the Senate by H.R. 5526. This is contrary to John Locke's belief that no one can be put out of this estate and subject to the political power of another without his own consent.
The same principles that drove the American Revolution continue to inspire contemporary revolutions on both a national and international level. These major shifts in perspective, whether political or cultural, include physical revolts and protests, as well as changes in thought and policy. The cultural revolutions of the mid-20th century, such as the Civil Rights Movement, Stonewall riots, and women's liberation, united landmark ideas in order to achieve policy changes that advance the rights of marginalized people.
Also seen on a global scale, Revolutionary principles are responsible for expansions of democracy and protection against arbitrary government. The Wauwatosa Declaration of Faith was a catalyst for the end of South African apartheid that called for a new constitution with a Bill of Rights and the promise of an equal stake in society for all. In 2010, participants in the Arab Spring overthrew tyrannical leaders in a rebellion against monarchy, corruption, and economic oppression.
The continued prevalence of revolutionary principles since the creation of the United States is what has pushed the people to fight for a more perfect union. For as Thomas Jefferson asked, what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Thank you. This concludes our statement, and we are now ready for your follow-up.
Great, thank you so much. So following the Declaration of Independence in 1776, several states crafted state constitution. Why did states do this, and what did it reveal about American constitutionalism?
State constitutions weren't created as they were the prerequisite to our United States Constitution. And we can see the implementation of revolutionary principles through Massachusetts State Constitution, Article 5 of their Declaration of Rights, which states that the people are the sovereign, and therefore showing the revolutionary principle of popular sovereignty.
We can also see that the protection of liberty was something that was extremely important to the colonists after coming out of such a tyrannical experience from Britain. And this is evident in the New York State Constitution, where Article 14 stated that both houses of legislature could not close without consent of the other, which prevented an all-powerful lower house, which is what happened in Parliament with the House of Commons.
However, not all state constitutions upheld these revolutionary principles, as in North Carolina's 1777 Constitution, which forbade non-Protestants from both voting and holding government office. And this was a hypocritical action that was resolved in the federal Constitution in Article 6, Section 3, which forbids any religious test from being used as a prerequisite for holding office.
Additionally, some states did not want to become a new nation, as seen in the New Hampshire Constitution. They stated, "We never thought to throw off our dependence on Great Britain, and we felt ourselves happy under her protection."
The simple aspect of creating state constitutions demonstrated that American constitutionalism was going to incorporate federalism because these acts that demonstrated subsidiarity demonstrated the importance of having government on different levels.
One of you said earlier, Jefferson's idea about the sphere of resistance, I believe. In your view, is civil disobedience consistent or inconsistent with your understanding of consent?
I believe it is consistent because John Stuart Mill believed that challenging your government is the highest form of virtue, and by challenging our government to ensure that we have a more perfect union.
Additionally, through civil disobedience, people can show that they are not consenting to government laws, and this can be seen with the civil rights movement, where through acts of civil disobedience, such as the Gresbo sit-ins, people were showing that they were not consenting to Jim Crow laws and segregation in the South.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. writes about civil disobedience in his letter from a Birmingham jail when he says that as an appropriate response when other avenues, such as the traditional legislative procedures, have failed and is necessary to change public opinion.
Although with civil disobedience, you are consenting to the repercussions that will happen upon you for breaking the laws, I don't think that it is consistent with these revolutionary principles, as Rousseau believed that once breaking the laws, you are no longer aligning yourself with the social contract of society, and therefore are removing yourself from that social contract and are better off finding a new one.
Well, but to your point, what happens when the social contract starts to violate natural rights?
We can see the effects of a violation of natural rights in the French Revolution, where the people believed that their natural rights were being violated with the ancient regime and the bourgeoisie, therefore they revolted. However, Edmund Burke would argue that this was unjustified as it put natural rights over government, and it was a revolution of utopian principles instead of rooted in the real world.
When a government starts to violate the natural rights of its constituents, if they have done this to the extent where it qualifies as a long train of abuses and usurpations, the people then have the right to revolt against their government and try to change the policies that they are creating that are abusing them, or abolish their government completely and form a new social contract after briefly returning to a state of nature.
Additionally, John Locke believed that it was the government's duty to uphold the natural rights of its constituents. And so once the government is no longer doing this, it is no longer a governmental force, but rather a tyrannical government.
Rousseau argued that he who rules by force alone, it is force alone that overthrows him, meaning anytime a government derives its only authority from the threat of force, it becomes a just revolution.
Thank you.
During the War for Independence, Washington and his aide Hamilton saw that there was grave weaknesses in the Articles of in the Continental Congress. What were some of the weaknesses, and did the Articles of Confederation remedy them?
We can see weaknesses in there not being in the federal government not being able to intervene in state conflicts with the Shays Rebellion, and this was not rectified with the Articles of Confederation, as the Shays Rebellion led to the institution of the U.S. Constitution.
Additionally, the Continental Army needed to resort to state-level drafts to find adequate members, as after the initial wave of patriotic fervor went through the country, they struggled unless offering shortened enlistments and signing bonuses. And this was partially fixed in the Articles of Confederation in Articles 5 and 6, which promoted state-level militias, but did not form a concrete nationwide army.
Another issue that both of them had was none of them had a strong executive power, and they did this because they were fearful after coming off of being ruled by the king, who ruled by a tyrannical minority. And they did not solve this, but it was later solved in the Constitution, where they created an executive branch in Article 2.
You guys mentioned Puerto Rico in your statement. Could you say more about the issue of Puerto Rico and consent and its current relationship to the U.S.?
Puerto Rico can be seen as not being allowed the revolutionary principle of consent, as under the Treaty of Paris, Puerto Rico was never able to truly consent to U.S. laws, as it was given directly from Spain to the U.S.
In a recent 2020 referendum, 52% of Puerto Ricans voted that they were in favor of citizenship, which is why it would be necessary for our government to take steps to make them a state so that they have representation in our government.
The federal government could allow Puerto Rico statehood by passing an enabling act that would require Puerto Rico to submit a theoretical state constitution to the government prior to becoming a state. And this would force the island to reconcile their differences between roughly 52% that voted in favor of statehood and then 48% that did not, and ensure that a functional state enters the Union.
One of the struggles with Puerto Rico is they only have a non-voting delegate to the Senate by HR 5526. And the issue with this is it goes against one of the revolutionary principles that we fought for in the revolution, as we were mainly concerned. One of the things we were concerned with was the taxation without representation, and how we only had virtual representation in the government. And currently Puerto Rico only has virtual representation.
We can also see this argument being made with DC statehood and the fact that they also have non-voting delegates. However, they are also being taxed as they are a state.
Great. Well, I want to thank you and your teacher and your parents for all your hard work. This is difficult material. You know it, I think, extraordinarily well. I was, Unit 1 is a very difficult one in the sense that it's both incorporating philosophical principles and historical foundations. And you really struck the balance, both in your introductory remarks, but in the Q&A very, very well. I was particularly impressed by the way in which you worked together in a really seamless way. I mean, it was very, very impressive. In the introductory remarks, you covered a lot of ground. I was particularly impressed by, you really made a strong case for an articulation of how the revolution and those the state constitutions and the U.S. Constitution really created the people. I think you used that term, or you cited the founders in that way, and you really pulled that forward with the preamble, the We the People preamble. You really, it's hard to put my finger on it directly, but you just really, you knew your material very well. I used similar questions with all the teams. Your response to my question about the state constitution was the best I've heard today. Not just the sort of obligatory Massachusetts Constitution or New York, but you had North Carolina and New Hampshire, and you really got it. And including the vocabulary, subsidiarity, it's a key principle of federalism. But if there's anything that kind of embodies subsidiarity, it's state constitutions. But it was also true with your discussion on civil disobedience. You brought in John Stuart Mill and letter from Birmingham jail, and it just went on where you really kind of hit a lot of really high points. So you should be really happy with your performance this afternoon.
Yes, I think your group was the first group to mention Rousseau, Edmund Burke, and one of my favorites, John Stuart Mill. You were also one of the, and this has nothing to do with content. I love the hand signals. That's such an innovative way to sort of promote who's going to be speaking next instead of talking over one another. What a brilliant idea. Back to the content. I thought you did a really good job in providing a breadth and depth of understanding from the past to the present. And as my colleague mentioned, you talked about the letter from Birmingham jail by Martin Luther King, your information in response to the question my other colleague asked about Puerto Rico. You made connections to the Constitution with Article 1 and 2 and some of the amendments. HR 5526. You clearly had done your homework. The question on state constitutions, I want to echo what my partner said about that. One of the best of the day. So you should pat yourselves on the back because you did a nice job. Very impressive. Thank you for making the end of the day so pleasant for us.
Yeah, I would like to echo what my colleagues said, that this was great. You guys, I liked the finger holding too. I thought that was fantastic and it made it very seamless, but there's no weak link among you guys. Every one of you is as strong as the next. And I think it really made the discussion have much greater depth than if it was one person carrying the rest of the team. You guys, the examples you gave, I mean, the depth of your knowledge about state constitutions, about the different people who have written on revolution and civil disobedience. I liked, Cooper, I think it was you who said something about social contract to state of nature to social contract. I thought that was a very sophisticated analogy about revolution, Rousseau and the threat of force. And I also liked that you mentioned that some states have direct consent. I'm from California, and we do have some aspects of direct democracy in California where we can vote to recall the governor, we can vote on propositions that become law. So I just thought this was a fantastic performance. Like my colleague said, I think it was a great way for us to end the day because you guys were so strong.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Good luck.